How Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4 and the Hebrew word Echad proves there is only one God. The Hebrew word Echad means one, as in singular, not compound unity. Other biblical verses confirm this. So this is the Hebrew text of Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4. The Hebrew word we're going to be focusing on, as you see on the screen there, is Echad. The Hebrew word Echad always means single, absolute, unqualified, undivisible one. The Hebrew dictionary confirms this. The Hebrew word Echad appears over 900 times in the Hebrew Bible and always means one, an indivisible unit of one. Strong's dictionary says Echad, a numerical form. Properly, Echad means united, one, alike, alone, altogether, and anything, a piece, a certainty, each, one, 11, every, few, first, a man, once, one, only, other, some, together. So Echad has multiple meanings. They always mean one, alone, a piece, united, etc., etc. So these are words where it only implies one singular unit and not a compound unity of a unit, according to the Hebrew dictionary. The Hebrew word Echad simply means an undivisible unit of one. We can see this in other biblical verses from the Old Testament, where the Hebrew word Echad means only one. Genesis chapter 2 verse 24, Leviticus chapter 7 verse 7, Numbers chapter 17 verse 3, Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 7, Exodus chapter 12 verse 49, Jeremiah chapter 24 verse 2, Psalms chapter 27 verse 4, Genesis chapter 42 verse 13, Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 42, Leviticus chapter 14 verse 5, Numbers chapter 7 verse 44, Numbers chapter 29 verse 38, etc., etc. So, if you read these verses, all of these verses have Echad. And if you read all those verses, those Old Testament verses simply mean one unit or one item or one being or one person, etc., etc. So nowhere in those Old Testament verses that I just cited implies a compound unity. It only implies a single unit or a singular one being or person or item or thing or personhood. So the Hebrew word Echad in the Old Testament, even after Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4, always means one undivisible unit or one undivisible being or person. So this refutes the idea of a compound unity in the Hebrew word Echad using other Old Testament verses. Conclusion here is that the Hebrew word Echad always means one. There's no compound unity in the word Echad. It always means one, as in one undivisible unit, one undivisible being, one undivisible thing, one undivisible personhood, etc., etc. Thus, the Trinity is not found in the Old Testament or even alluded to in the Old Testament. The Quran says the same thing. The Quran chapter 112 says there is only one God, and He is undivisible, and He is begotten not, nor is He begotten. He is the absolute one, and this is in agreement with Deuteronomy, with the Old Testament or the Bible, Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4, where it says God is one and always will be one and undivisible. So this refutes the idea that the Trinity is in the Old Testament or is even alluded to in the Old Testament. Stay tuned. More videos coming up ahead talking about various biblical topics.